I actually pulled myself out of the hole. I think it was like adrenaline, but I remember like feeling grit, hitting the ground, having a hot, like feeling like heat on my neck and on my face. It wasn't even like pain, it was like intense heat. And then feeling like, oh, there's like stuff in my mouth, like grit. And it was, of course, like my teeth. Yeah. So grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Went to high school here. My family was in the jewelry industry, like small business owners. So that was like a very focal point of my upbringing, just seeing my parents grind in a small business, which is pretty cool. Didn't have a ton of military influence in my life growing up, but essentially decided in high school that I either wanted to enlist and try to join some branch of the military and deploy and go that route. Hadn't heard about West Point. My parents were like, you should check this out. And 6 attempts at the SAT later, like finally squeezed in. The first 2 years I absolutely hated. I can remember calling my parents like every day the first year being like, this is not for me. Like I made a huge mistake. This is not what I want. But I think, I was encouraged by a few mentors at school to kind of stick it out. I think I figured out that I hated the academics. I hated the school portion of it. I hated being a cadet. But when it got to summer training and getting to do things that I envisioned I would be doing in the military, I fell in love with it. So I think the summer between freshman and sophomore year, getting to go to airborne school, meet like real NCOs and soldiers in the Army, kind of changed my perspective. And I understood that, West Point was temporary. The Army was a completely different entity that was more of what I was envisioning. Beyond there, had the opportunity to branch into infantry, was an infantry officer, and then got to assess for the 75th Ranger Regiment. I actually showed up to my unit right after they deployed. So I was at like an empty duty station, empty battalion for like a month, and then jumped on a commercial airliner, flew to Ramstein, got on another airline, and then showed up in Helmand, Afghanistan, and essentially walked right into a platoon, which you can imagine was like pretty nerve-wracking as like essentially a college kid taking over a platoon on deployment, 2 months after you get to your duty station. But I was super fortunate, like loved that platoon. Had an amazing platoon sergeant that, held my hand the whole way through. And ultimately it was an amazing deployment. Gosh, it's funny. I remember being like very conscious about how I was going to be perceived. Like you have this idea for the year prior to that, like the year training to be the best platoon leader that you can be, because you want to show up to your unit and you want to, make your platoon proud. And my platoon was actually like really receptive. There's always that first couple weeks of kind of like who's the new guy. They had been deployed for, at that point, I think the point I showed up, they had been deployed for 2 or 3 months already. So they'd already gone on missions, they've had that bonding experience, and then I'm showing up as kind of fresh meat to this unit. And, I think the most important thing is just going in with like a sense of humility and understanding that, frankly, you know nothing. I think that's something as well, like with the Ranger Regiment, having quiet self-confidence. I do think it's an interesting exposure though, right? Like, yeah, it was like the first time I saw any sort of like form of like real violence in the world, we live in a place where we don't think about, where are we going to get food and water, and who's going to be potentially threatening our families every day. And it was just interesting to see the world from that new perspective, where people's needs are so much more raw than what we experience here in the States. That was like highly eye-opening to me. Seeing kids that, there were families that I remember meeting where, there's 6 brothers in the family, 3 are fighting for the Afghan National Army, and 3 are fighting for the Taliban, because it's truly just the need to survive, and who was going to provide, security and shelter for your family at that time. I had one deployment with my Ranger platoon to Kabul, and absolutely loved it. Got to do some really interesting, cool things. Got to go up north to Mazar-i-Sharif for about a month and work with the Ranger Reconnaissance Company on some different missions they were doing up there. Got to be the security detail for the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, John Bass, and the State Department for about a week. That was really exciting and fun. Absolutely loved working with the Ranger Regiment. If there's one thing that I really was blown away by, was just the quality of people that I met there. And not just officers, like the NCOs are incredible. They're highly mindful and intentional people that, you know, I think have a really good head on their shoulders about like what's important. We were doing a nighttime stress shoot where I was working with our mortar platoon, assessing them, going through this live fire stress shoot, and fell into a large cement culvert about like 6-7 feet deep, and landed headfirst in this hole and broke my neck, jaw, and knocked out like most of my teeth. People always talk about like the sense of invincibility that we all have growing up, and all of a sudden like simple tasks becoming really hard things. Like for 6 months I had to like blend all of my food and put it, basically siphon it, not siphon, that's not the right word, syringe it into my mouth to eat, or like blend it up. You know, like little simple daily tasks that become really challenging. Like I needed help to get dressed because I couldn't lift my arm up and I had like a neck brace on. So, you know, my 3-week girlfriend at the time, like basically helping me kind of navigate a lot of those things. That was kind of, yeah, a big turning point. And then from like a personal perspective, had only been dating my wife, you know, my now wife, 3 weeks at the time. So, you know, was super fortunate to have her through that whole experience. 3 weeks into dating, you're so new in your relationship, you know, and then having to weather a storm like that was something that, to me, told me that she was the one. She met my mom while I was in surgery at Madigan Army Hospital, and you know, I think seeing her, like how she treated me through that whole experience, made it obvious that, you know, this is my wife and who like I wanted to be with. We all like build these. I think this goes into military transition too, but like we all build like these images of who we are, right? And it's not just all like physical, right? A lot of it's like who we are as a person. We identify as a certain way. You know, for me at that moment in my life, I was like, I'm like an Army Ranger. That's Drew. That's what I want to be, who I am. And you take it on as a part of your identity. I think, you know, to an extent, like that can be healthy for like your unit and for your identity, but I think you also have to like understand at a deeper level of like who you are and what you represent isn't just the job that you're in or how you what you look like to other people. That whole scenario kind of took me down the road of a med board. You know, I really wanted to stay in the Army, submitted a bunch of waivers to stay in. They all got denied by branch, and unfortunately was kind of looking at, okay, what are the next steps? This sounds really cheesy and kind of self-helpy, but I think like forcing yourself to do hard things is something that's like super healthy. I don't even mean just physical, even like, you know, intellectually or emotionally. Like doing hard things that kind of keep you sharp and keep your engine moving is super important. For me, getting out, I kind of found that in my next career. So with entrepreneurship, I think being able to like put your head down, focus on the task, kind of give yourself a new mission, and then really lean into that. And just like you would lean into training in the military or getting a good workout, I think if you let yourself go and you let yourself kind of lose that edge, it's really easy to fall into like kind of a dark place. So I think, you know, whether you feel like it or not, find something that you can pour yourself into and, you know, and grind at like a new challenge. And I can remember like distinctly driving home from work at night from my family's business, being like, you know, having just gotten out of the Ranger Regiment, being like, gosh, like what am I doing with my life? Like I'm working in a jewelry store. Like I was just like fast roping out of helicopters and hanging out with Rangers every day. And, now I'm like selling jewelry. So I think kind of like that life moment and that realization of like, I got to try something different and like take some risks and go for it really allowed me and gave me the confidence to go for it with Wove. I think number one is like find a good support system. It's kind of the foundation that you need to do anything. If you don't have that, it's going to be 10x more difficult to find something that you love, that you can grind on, that you can pour yourself into. Like if I didn't have my wife, my family, and my friends, like there's not a chance I would have been able to, grind on a startup for a year and a half. About 8 months of it not getting paid. So, I think that support system is probably like the most important thing. And then find something that you're excited about. I think you got to believe in what you're doing too, and you got to be able to see yourself in it. There's so many great military organizations, and it's tough because I know a lot of guys get out and they kind of want to cut ties. They're like, I don't want to go to a military support group. I don't want that. I want to be independent. I want to cut ties and move on. But I think like those are great organizations. I also think a lot of guys have this sense of I can take care of myself, right? I don't need help. I don't need a therapist or a coach. But I got a coach or therapist, whatever you want to call it, about 6 months after getting out, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made, right? Because I did have my wife and I did have my support system, but what I found was I was like very much leaning into that group and venting a lot, and it wasn't healthy for those relationships. Sometimes, it's super humbling, but, finding a coach or a therapist or someone that you can chat with and talk to, even if you're not at a place where you're like highly depressed, but you still have transition concerns, like absolutely do it. It's like totally worth, the benefit. So it's like not big things. It's like small things. Cooking dinner with my wife. Like I love that. Going to the park with my dog. It's like little moments of just like taking a time to breathe and sit back is like so essential. I'm the type of person I fill my time to a point where you feel like you can't breathe and it's like hard to find air. But I think taking those moments to pause, be with family. I've gotten to spend more time with family in the last 6 months than I have like the 10 years prior to that. And that's been like an absolutely amazing thing. Kind of getting to strengthen those relationships and, spend more time with people that you love. But yeah, I would say those are kind of like the things like I look forward to weekly, and that like keep my like spirit like happy.